Well, good afternoon. I'm standing on the steps of our beautiful and historic State House, which has been here since 1772 and which played such a pivotal role in the birth of our nation. Just a few steps from where I'm standing is our old Senate chamber, where General George Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Forces. 233 years ago, the Revolutionary War officially ended right here, inside this very State House, with the ratification of the Treaty of Paris in 1784. For Maryland and for our nation, this has always been a revered and sacred place where great things have begun, where great men and women have served, and where great things have been accomplished. However, that rich history and proud legacy is being tarnished by a few government officials who have failed to uphold the solemn oaths of office that they took to obey the Constitution and laws of this state, to uphold the public trust, and to represent the interests of the people. During my campaign to become governor, I pledged not only to restore Maryland's economy and put Marylanders to work, but also that I would do my best to put an end to politics as usual in Annapolis. On election night, as I gave my acceptance speech, I pledged that the very next day, Lieutenant Governor Rutherford and I were going to get to work on cleaning up the mess in Annapolis and restoring integrity to our state capitol. I was deeply humbled and truly honored to stand on these hallowed steps right behind me on that snowy day to take the oath of office as Maryland's new governor, as we pledged to put Maryland on a new path. That day I spoke about my father and said that I learned more about integrity from him in one day than most men learn in a lifetime. We stressed putting aside the politics and the partisanship and the personal interests in order to do the right thing for the people that we represent. And on that inauguration day, I also pledged that our new government would be held to a higher standard. On day one, I issued my very first executive order to begin holding public officials more accountable. We outlined the standards of conduct that my own cabinet, my own staff, as well as all employees of the entire executive branch of state government would be held to from top to bottom. Not a day goes by that I don't think about what an incredible honor it is to have been given this opportunity to serve the people of Maryland. And not a day goes by that I don't think about the immense responsibility that we have as public officials to always conduct ourselves in a manner that is deserving of the trust that the citizens of Maryland have put in us. From the first day of our administration, our team has been diligently working to root out wrongdoing and corruption, no matter where it's taking place. The extensive investigation into our Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services resulted in 80 indictments of corrections officers, state employees, as well as gang members. And after 30 months of an extensive federal investigation, which is still underway, we are now also painfully aware that current and former members of our own legislature, along with local government officials and others, have been abusing the public trust and using their offices for self-enrichment and criminal activity. This type of conduct is disgraceful and must no longer be tolerated in our great state. U.S. District Court Judge J. Frederick Motz once referred to Maryland's political system as a, quote, culture of corruption. Maryland has not had comprehensive ethics reform in 15 years, with the potential of even more state and federal charges to be filed against additional public officials. Marylanders are now asking how many more public officials have to be indicted before we are finally going to take the actions necessary to clean up this mess. Today, we are announcing our Integrity in Government Initiative, which is a multifaceted effort to strengthen and toughen our state ethics laws and to provide oversight and create transparency in order to help the public understand how and why decisions are being made by Maryland's lawmakers. The initiatives we are introducing today are in an effort to restore the public's trust in our state government and to finally bring some transparency, accountability, and fairness to Annapolis. Today, we are introducing the Public Integrity Act of 2017. We cannot allow the unethical behavior of the few to tarnish the goodwill of the many in our state capital. We cannot allow a culture of corruption to take root and to grow in our state. Together, we have a shared obligation to restore the honor and the foundation of public trust that these proud institutions once held. When legislators are being charged with taking cash bribes to sell their votes, it is time for action to be taken to finally clean up this mess in Annapolis. When legislators are allowed to lobby their colleagues for legislation which directly results in their own self-enrichment and massive personal financial gain while still continuing to serve in the legislature, it is time for action to finally be taken to clean up the mess in Annapolis. When former legislators are allowed to serve on state commissions where they then use those positions to make and influence decisions that are not in the public's interest, but that simply enrich those individuals or their family members, it is time to finally take action to clean up the mess in Annapolis. The Public Integrity Act of 2017 will place additional restrictions on both the executive and legislative branches of state government to eliminate this kind of unacceptable behavior from continuing to occur. The Public Integrity Act of 2017 will prohibit legislators from introducing or influencing any legislation which in any way will directly benefit them, their employer, or a business that they have an interest in. This act will prohibit staff of the governor or the legislature from lobbying for a minimum of 1 year after they leave state service. It will prohibit executive staff or legislators from directing businesses or interest groups to a particular lobbyist or lobbying firm. The Public Integrity Act of 2017 will also prohibit anyone who is employed by, has a financial interest in, or receives compensation from a lobbying firm from being appointed to a state board or commission. Currently, legislators exempt themselves from oversight by the State Ethics Commission. This legislation will require members of the legislature to be regulated by the same State Ethics Commission that everyone else in state government is, rather than by their fellow colleagues. The governor and all other state employees are already held accountable under the Ethics Commission, and holding members of the legislature to the same standards will create much-needed consistency and independent oversight across state government. Second part of our initiative Our Integrity in Government initiative, which we're introducing today, is the Legislative Transparency Act of 2017, which will require all sessions of the General Assembly to be live streamed to the public through both audio and video. Maryland is one of only 7 states in the entire nation that does not live stream video of their deliberations in either house of the legislature. Our administration has already funded $1.2 million in this year's FY 2018 budget to cover the cost of enabling this live streaming, so there is no reason why the legislature cannot act this reform right away. We supported similar legislation for this last year, but ironically, this important transparency legislation never saw the light of day because it was hidden in a drawer and was never even brought to the floor for an up or down vote. The public has a right to know what their lawmakers are saying and doing during the debate on these important issues, which are affecting the taxpayers. Legislators should be deliberating and making these important decisions out in the open, in the light of day. Why do they insist on dealing in secrecy? What is it that they have to hide? Especially in the light of the recent unethical and potential criminal activity that is taking place, Marylanders deserve this openness and transparency. The third piece of our Integrity in Government initiative, which we are introducing today, is the Liquor Board Reform Act of 2017. These local liquor board and liquor inspector jobs are the last vestiges of an archaic political patronage system which for many decades has been controlled and run by state senators and their local political party central committees. Given the recent indictments of both liquor board members and legislators, it has become clear that it is finally time to clean up this mess. These positions should be filled by qualified and fully vetted professional law enforcing and law abiding regulators. Not by members of a corrupt criminal enterprise, which is filled with people in political patronage jobs who can shake down license holders or license applicants for cash bribes or for campaign contributions. The Liquor Board Reform Act of 2017 will fully remove the political party central committees from the nominating process. This legislation will still provide for the advice and consent of the Senate for these nominations, and a state senator may still nominate a liquor commissioner, but they will no longer be able to do so in secrecy, and they will no longer be able to do it in conjunction with their political functionaries. This new legislation will require senators to publicly and formally make an official nomination or recommendation, and each nominee will now have to go through a thorough vetting process and will be required to submit to a criminal background check. This legislation will also enhance the power of the State Ethics Commission to provide additional oversight into the liquor board process. Lastly today, in a further attempt at promoting fairness and good government, and to further assist in the cleaning up of the political process in Annapolis, the fourth initiative we are introducing today is the Redistricting Reform Act of 2017, which will promote free and fair elections in Maryland by removing the politics and the politicians from drawing their own district lines. This legislation will provide for a nonpartisan redistricting commission and will create a fair, nonpartisan, open, and transparent redistricting process. An overwhelming majority of Marylanders, regardless of their party, strongly support this legislation. The people of Maryland desperately want and certainly deserve balance, fairness, and bipartisanship in our state. Fairness means encouraging a diversity of opinion and allowing for checks and balances and making sure our elections are fair and competitive so that voters can actually pick their representatives instead of the other way around. In Maryland, we haven't had that kind of balance, fairness, or competitiveness in our political system for decades. In fact, we've been singled out for having some of the worst, most gerrymandered districts in the United States of America. Free and fair elections are perhaps the most basic promise that those in power must provide to our citizens. Our proposed legislation is supported by most Marylanders, yet lawmakers hid this important reform legislation in a drawer last year and refused to even allow it to be voted on up or down on the floor of the House and the Senate. The time is now to take action on this important reform legislation, which could have a dramatic and positive impact on our continuing efforts to clean up the political system in Maryland. The people of Maryland are completely fed up with the status quo, and they are sick and tired of partisanship and politics as usual. Now is not the time for political gamesmanship. Now is not the time for legislators to focus on partisan politics or the 2018 campaign or the fights that are going on in Washington. Now is not the time for our elected leaders to put their heads in the sand and pretend that unacceptable, unethical, and even criminal activity isn't happening right here in our midst inside of this very State House. The time for action is now. The time to finally clean up the mess in Annapolis is now. The time to restore integrity to our state capitol is now. In just a few moments, I will be going up these marble steps behind me, and I will personally hand carry these important pieces of reform legislation to both chambers of our legislature. And over the coming weeks, we will be asking our legislators on both sides of the aisle to join together with us to enact these meaningful ethics reforms. I strongly believe that together we must do whatever it takes to restore integrity to our state capitol, to ensure that the best interests of Maryland's citizens are being represented fairly and honestly, and that the voices of the people that we represent are finally being heard here in Annapolis. Thank you very much.